Well, good afternoon and welcome to another live stream of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. If we haven't met, I'm Kevin Roberts and have the privilege of serving as the executive director of the foundation. As you know, in this new series of live streams, we are covering all of the important topics of the day for our audiences outside Texas. We cover things like civics and American history, or as we did yesterday, the importance of attending to culture and society. For those of us here in Texas, and for that matter, for people tuning in who don't have the privilege of waking up in this great state, we have a very important topic. Some might argue the single most important topic facing Texans today, and that is the state of property taxes. With us are three gentlemen, three great patriots who played an outsized role in the last legislative session in initiating and pushing through the legislature historic property tax reform. If you're tuning in Texas, you know that these three men, particularly the two legislators who are with us, deserve a lot of credit for what happened. And if you're tuning in from outside Texas, you know that it's relevant to you because what happens in Texas is relevant to the whole country. And so we want to be sure that we keep Texas, Texas, so that we can, in fact, be the light to America, which of course is the light to the world. So joining us today are three great Texans, three good friends, I'm happy to say. State Senator Paul Bettencourt, who has been in the state Senate for several years, very important voice on all things conservative, but particularly fiscal matters in Texas. His colleague on the other side of the Capitol, Texas House member Dustin Burrows from Lubbock, also great patriot, articulate about the importance of limited government and liberty and fair taxation. And my good friend and colleague here, our chief economist at TPPF, Dr. Vance Ginn. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. I'm not going to belabor the introduction because people tuning in know how important this topic is. And so, Senator Bettencourt, I'm going to go to you first because you've been fighting this issue for such a long time, even prior to your arrival in the Texas legislature. For our audience who they're very knowledgeable about everything, but maybe they need a refresher about the importance of property taxes and why here, a few months before the legislative session, with all of these other challenges going on, like whether we're going to have a college football season, are we discussing property taxes today?
Well, thanks, Kevin. And look, the problem with Texas property taxes has really been real simple. It's that as values go up, tax rates never came down, so values inched up, and in some cases not inched up. 10% increases per year were never offset by taxes coming down. Now, this personal history on this started 20 years ago when I was a tax assessor back in Harris County. We had our first big explosion in property tax values in 2021. And that was actually a year that I managed to talk my commissioner's court into a tiny tax cut because they weren't used to ever reducing values. And I know that my colleague, in the House, we've heard this so often that people were saying that as values go up, they were giving people a break by not lowering the tax rate. That's what we heard from every elected official. And I know Chairman Burrows will talk about that too. That was not a break. As your value went up, your bill went up. And really, that's what we finally managed to get passed, which is SB 2 in combination with House Bill 3, really worked on both sides of the property tax bill for counties and cities in major areas. SB 2 basically did it on a hard cap. HB 3 on a hard cap on the school side at 2.5%. And we managed to lower the rollback rate for the first time in 38 years from 8% to 3.5%. And what that did is that puts pressure down as values go up for people to actually give back tax relief in the form of tax rate cuts. Now, from a historical perspective, this has been around. This fight in Texas was around since 2003. When prior to being a senator, even Lieutenant Governor Patrick and I took about 300 people on a bus trip up to the Capitol for hearings, and so it literally was a decade plus of a fight to get to the point where we've got tax relief now in place on both the school side and the non-school side. Now, we are in a bit of a fight on that at this point because uh, the pressurization to spend more of your money is just ingrained in government. And we have people that constantly want to talk about pushing it to the stops, whatever the stop is. But the answer, and I think Chairman Burrows will echo this, is that we've renamed the triggers in the code to the no new tax revenue rate, which is the old effective rate. That's the rate where basically that's the goal that taxing jurisdictions should be at. That's where the last year's levy and this year's levy, or the new one coming in, are balanced out after several puts and takes. It means that taxpayers really get a break, and there's no reason to go to a voter approved limit of 3.5%, much less than what was the old rollback rate of 8%. Now, so I think that what people will see this year is there is going to be some good reductions. There already has been, actually, on the school side. In the prior tax year, there was a approximately 7 penny reduction in school rates overall. And this year, as values go up, you're going to see them come down. And also, what I see now on the city and county side is, while there's a lot of jawboning about taking tax rates to the max, I don't think they're doing it. And because I think, quite frankly, I can say one word: it's COVID. And in this day and age, with the COVID and oil shocks that we've had in the economy, I think local taxpayers are going to look very, very dimly on, and a big thumbs down on, any type of property tax increases, especially if there's a taxing jurisdiction that's wild enough to take it to the old stops and fight their way through whatever legal challenge. But I think that this is a year for moderation, and it looks like, and I think Chairman Burrows could take this more, because I think he knew, like, the city of Dallas got a text message, or actually a presentation from Texas Municipal League, and said, go to the old rollback number, smash your taxpayers. And they were smart enough to vote 10-4 to say, no, we're not doing it. We're not going to raise taxes that much in the middle of an economic crisis and a pandemic. And I think that's the right answer. And that's what we've been seeing, Kevin. But I'll let my distinguished colleague, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, take it from here.
Well, thanks, Senator Bettencourt, and for everything you're doing, as well as your courage during these attempts by some local jurisdictions, although they were ill-fated, to raise taxes. Chairman Burrows, you deserve just as much credit. Those of us who have the privilege of seeing you elected officials do your jobs, for which you are so significantly compensated, right, as legislators. We're a fickle people. That's what Alexis de Tocqueville said about Americans. So we're never fully satisfied. But I would just say, on behalf of everyone tuning in, and Texans, grateful for what both of you have done. But all of that to say, Chairman Burrows, you've had a bird's eye view, as Senator Bettencourt has, in the aftermath of the property tax reform. You've been keeping tabs on some of these attempts across the state to raise taxes. Please do for us, from your perspective as a House member, what Senator Bettencourt did, which is the overview of the sort of state of affairs. And secondly, are there some hot spots, some places that we need to be paying attention to as taxpayers?
Yeah, so let me first say, I'm probably the newest of the two of us to the fight, or I know I am, and it was a privilege to get to, pick up and help Chairman Bettencourt with a bill he's been trying to pass for multiple sessions. And I think we ended up with a, reasonably good product. We think we passed the most conservative version of the bill that we possibly could pass, but it doesn't mean that it's perfect, and doesn't mean that it doesn't need some refining going forward in the future. I think property taxes are at the forefront of everyone's minds, really for a couple of reasons. First, we are going through an economic downturn. Government has asked people to sacrifice, not have business opens. That's not really the topic of discussion, whether we agree or disagree with it. But I think that people also expect government to sacrifice with them. And they also know that property taxes are one of the biggest burdens, to our economy recovering from this downturn, and to attracting new jobs and businesses, because after all, that is the private sector that actually creates and stimulates the economy. And so we want to make sure that we're not dragging it down, and we get out of, this slump or whatever it is as quickly as we can, by making sure we don't make the burden of property taxes even greater than it already is. So, I think that the frustration with the property tax system in general is some of it's part of the lack of transparency in it. And what I mean by that is everybody knows that year after year after year, they're paying more in property taxes. And sometimes it's very opaque as to why that is. The state of Texas does not actually have a statewide property tax. We're banned from doing that, but all the local taxing entities are the ones that, have that. And so year after year, people, get their notice of appraised value. Sometime, during the late spring, they go through, and then the end of the year, they write a check and they realize they've paid more and more and more and more. And there's this finger pointing game that goes on with some local entities. They say, well, we didn't raise your taxes. That was just the appraisals that did it. And people say, well, how is that? I don't understand. So we set out this year, multiple years, we passed it this year to try to kind of change the understanding of that process. We tried to say, okay, look, the appraised value is going to come down, and that's supposed to be a fair valuation of the property you own. But that's just the first step in the process. The second step is your taxing entities go forward and they set their budget. They decide how much of your money they want to spend in a given year, and by correlation, how much of your property they want to levy a tax on to take to pay for those services. And they propose a rate at which they do that. So the rate is supposed to fluctuate to either make people's overall taxes go up or down. And a lot of people don't understand or don't realize that that second part is something they have immense control over. They've actually elected their mayors, their council members, their commissioners to these positions to go and represent them in these tax setting processes. And so what most people in larger jurisdictions that are over 200,000, next year will be everybody, is getting a postcard in the mail right now. And it directs them to go to a website. For Lubbock, it is lubbockcountytaxes.org. Harris County has one. Everybody has one. And people can go there, enter their address, and what it's going to show you in real sense, and it tells you what is the no new revenue rate. What is for each of the different taxing entities? What is the proposed rate? And it'll show you in dollars and cents how much more your city intends to levy on your property to pay for the services. But here's what I think is a really powerful tool that's going on that I really want everyone watching to utilize. When you go to that website, there'll also be an opportunity for you to find that person that you elected to represent you in that tax rate setting process and give them feedback. Click on that link, it fills the form out. So for those of us who work 9 to 5, we can't leave to go to the rate setting hearings. You can still get in touch and have your voices heard. And it's really important to us who make this, because I'm sure Senator Bettencourt will agree with me. We always hear that, well, no one ever comes to the rate setting hearings. People just don't care about property taxes. But if you take the time to go to the website and have your voice heard, there's going to be a written record. So for those of us who are basically setting the guardrails on property tax, we know that it is something that's important to you. So those are the things that I'm watching for. Obviously, if you're a fan of Twitter or you're just a follower of it, you notice Chairman Bettencourt and I have done a lot to basically call out these cities that have tried to take away your right, the taxpayer's right to vote on increases over 3.5%. We're calling out these organizations that are trying to encourage your elected officials to go beyond that. That was a hard-fought, multi-session, a lot of blood-let battle to give you a right to vote on those tax increases. And so anybody who tries to circumvent that, we're going to call attention to that. We may have some ideas on how to fix it if they actually do it.
Well, I want to applaud both of you for your courage, and I really do mean that. And I say this not even from the standpoint of leading a think tank, but just as a taxpayer in Texas, for keeping that fight going on Twitter. The problem with taxation right now is too few people pay attention. And it's because they have very legitimate things that are going on in their lives, especially in this year 2020. And y'all have used this very important medium, ridiculous as it is, Twitter, to really good aims, which is to highlight some pretty nefarious aims. And it's really, really important we call a spade, because we're not just talking about increasing taxes. We're talking about people wanting to do that at a time that is the worst in our lifetimes. Just saying that as a historian. So I want to applaud you for
Kevin,
that.
if I could,
Yes, you
before
bet.
we go to Vance, let me just add something, because Chairman Burrows and you are on a very important topic. Look, the fact is, because of the transparencies in SB2, you've got these portals by county. Now, Cheryl Johnson, who's the tax assessor in Galveston County, one of the very few in the state that's actually for a tax rate cut, by the way. she said that when she contacted her elected officials and they said, we can't provide this information. We don't want people to have our emails. No, we want people to have their emails. I want you to go to those county portals and you've got the postcard and hit people up. And if they're talking about going above the no new, tax revenue, site, hit them hard on it. If they're above the voter approval limit, really hit them hard, because what are they doing and why? It's very important, Kevin, because Chairman Burrows and I have been tweeting, and I'll give you an example. There's like 38 jurisdictions that have talked about going to the old rollback rate and pushing past the SB2. And out of that, about 9 of them have pulled back out and said, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they did it because they see this Twitter traffic going. And quite frankly, one of the smaller, I think it was one of the smaller outfits. And when we looked at their numbers, it was going to cost them $100 or more just on the city tax if they had proceeded. And that's why we did the numbers. And I think that was, I won't say anything yet. I'll make sure. Let's check with David to know what city that was. But you have to speak out and stop. So join the Twitter barrage when you see Chairman Burrows and Chairman Bettencourt doing that. And I know you do, Kevin, and because you and Vince jump in on it.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Bettencourt, for mentioning that. So the aforementioned great chief economist of TPPF, Dr. Vance Ginn, thanks for joining us, sir. You played an important role on the outside in helping our friends in the legislature, including those members who composed a majority in the Senate and House. They deserve credit for voting courageously for that reform. So Vance, do the same thing for us that Chairman Bettencourt and Burrows did. Overview, state of play, and in particular, there's some hot spots in Texas that you would draw the attention to for our audience.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kevin. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you all today with the two chairmen who did such a fantastic job this past session. Whenever you think about it, going back in history, right? 1979 was when the rollback rate was really established. In 1981, they had raised it from 5% to 8%. But if you'll remember back then, that's the period of the great inflation, whenever inflation was running double digits across the United States. And so that seemed to reflect the times that we were in. But if you look over the last 25 years, inflation hasn't been above 4%, right? And so if that was the reason why we had changed it back then, it was time to do it again. And it was just a great opportunity for the many rounds of committee hearings that these two men went through and the other committee members. And it was just a great experience to go through that and to actually get something done. And it comes at a great point in time in our history when, as you mentioned, Kevin, the worst recession with the severity and the depth and the quickness that it hit from this almost of a coma-induced government lockdown of our economy to deal with COVID-19. I saw this when I was at the White House as the chief economist for the Office of Management and Budget, kind of across the whole nation. And then, of course, keeping an eye on Texas as a Texan, born and raised down in Houston. You could see what the effects that were having on people all across this great state. And right now there have been, back in just April and May, March and April, there were 1.3 million people who lost their job across Texas, 1.3 million. And we've gained about 500,000 jobs since then in May and June, but that's only about 40%. That means that about 700,000 plus are still unemployed across this great state, dealing with this overall virus and this induced recession that we've had, to where we need to get opened up and things of that nature. But I mentioned all that, and the unemployment rate, right, is right around 9% compared to the 3.5% we were just back in February, almost triple that. So we can see the economic effects that this is having on Texas families. And you add that to this idea that local governments need to expand their budgets in some capacity by more than 3.5%, when Texas families are oftentimes seeing their incomes fall dramatically from having some sort of income down to zero. Maybe they're on unemployment benefits right now. Maybe the federal enhanced unemployment just expired. You got all these things that are going on. And some of these local taxing entities are saying, you know what, we need to raise our taxes more. And by the way, we're going to do that is by spending more along the way. Because look, we have a revenue problem in the sense of how much we're taxing and the taxing burden, but it always starts with the spending problem time and again. And if you look down in Harris County, down in Chairman Bettencourt's part of the world, my former hometown, what you'll see is that Harris County's taxes have increased substantially by about 29% from 2014 to 2018, whereas population growth and inflation have only increased 11%, which is oftentimes used as a good metric to see how much the burden of government should grow to keep within the means of taxpayers. So that means it's only increased 3 times more. The tax burden has increased 3 times more than the means of taxpayers in Harris County. And we could go through different counties across this great state and see the same sort of thing. And when you think about the Texas model of having relatively lower taxes, relatively less government spending, and sensible regulatory climate, along with some other great things that is done here in Texas, property taxes is one that we've really got to nip in the bud right now in order to make sure that we can continue to be prosperous. So that way, whenever we're fully reopened again, which I hope is soon, we can find a way to come out of this faster than we otherwise would. And so that way, Texas families, right? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to help Texas families benefit and prosper more so than otherwise. And Texas has been the place to do that. And by the work that's been done by these two great chairmen, we could see a more vibrant Texas economy, meaning more jobs for our audience members and hopefully us one day as well, and different things that we're going to be looking at doing. So that way we can have the most vibrant economy possible.
Well, thanks, Vance, for that. I've got a couple questions before we move to audience questions at the top of the hour, and any of the three of you jump in. But what specific taxing jurisdictions in Texas have sort of rattled the saber about possibly raising taxes? And I ask that for the purposes of our audience members. So A, they know that this is real, and B, maybe they live there and they can really be paying attention.
Well, if I could, can y'all, I think, is this in focus? Okay. This is actually the last time that Chairman Burrows and I did a Twitter battle. And this is the city of Sherman. And the city of Sherman has a low tax rate by comparison, about roughly in the 40s. But they published a notice and said that they could go all the way up to 8%, which would have cost their city taxpayers $115 a year. Just the city portion would have cost $115. If they'd stayed at the voter approved rate of 3.5%, it was only 45%. And what Chairman Burrows and I were telling them the right thing to do was to go to the no new revenue tax rate, which was basically a break even for their taxpayers. And look, when we look around the state, Kevin, there's 38 of them that tried. 16 counties looked at it, 23 cities. And there's a kind of a cluster, sadly, as an Aggie, there's a cluster in the Bryan College Station area, okay? And we could read out some, city of Richardson, city of Beaumont, city of San Marcos. Again, we talked about the city of Dallas and Longview actually rejected it and said, no, we're not going to do it. Of course, there's a big fight in the city of Austin where you guys are, because they're trying to, put in a transportation initiative, and they're talking about staying within the 3.5%, but then asking for about, I don't know, a dozen more pennies for on top of that for transportation. So there's a big fight in a variety of places. I want to talk a little bit about Harris County, and then I'll give the floor back to Chairman Burrows. What happened in Dallas and Houston in the urban areas is that the tax bills got to about $5,500 on the average home. The average home being roughly about $235,000 in value, approximately. It's a little higher now, maybe it's closer to $250,000. But that's a tremendous amount of money that they were spending as a homeowner on that. And you mentioned, Kevin, earlier that, or I think it was Vince that mentioned that the taxation in the county went up about 3 times faster. Well, in 5 years, Harris County actually had a 54% revenue increase in 5 years. And that was until they ran into the wall last year, where they tried to go to the old 8% rollback rate, and 2 county commissioners, which are great heroes locally here, Commissioner Cagle and Commissioner Raddick, just walked out of the meeting. And when they walked out of the meeting, not only did they lose their tax rate increase, they actually had to go back to the effective rate, or what we now call the no new taxes rate, and people got a cut. That saved $186 million. Just 2 commissioners walking out of the meeting saved on their local property taxpayers. So this really means a lot because taxation is already very high. For a while, we were chasing New Jersey with the highest tax rate in the nation and about $2.31 on aggregate. The good news is that we're throwing the brakes on it, and Illinois has moved into second place. And that's what SB 2 and House Bill 3 will do, will drive down tax rates for the future.
Thank you. Chairman Burrows?
I think there's really kind of an interesting thing that may not be necessarily a coincidence. I had not heard of other commissioners walking out during that, but the other place that it happened was Lubbock County as well. And I think it's pretty appropriate that the only two counties I've ever heard this happening in happen to be yours and my home counties, so I thought that was pretty good. So let me kind of back up a little bit and tell some people, one of the things to watch for in this. SB 2 was a product over multiple sessions, as Chairman Bettencourt said, and there's multiple provisions in it that maybe we don't think are perfect, but basically are very important to a particular constituency, and how legislation's made is they get included. And one of the provisions was this disaster declaration exception to some of the rollback. And this came in, it predated even 2019, and it was important to, I think, some members who lived in areas that were hit by hurricanes where there was huge actual physical loss of property. And so the idea was that, okay, look, if there's a hurricane or tornado where you actually have physical destruction of property, maybe there is an opportunity that, there needs to be some relaxation on this. Well, so all of a sudden, we didn't really have, this cycle, or 2020 was the first year SB 2 was really put into effect, and you were going to feel it and see it and watch it happen. And nobody anticipated there being a Chinese virus pandemic that was going to happen. And next thing I know, Chairman Bettencourt and I are talking, we're hearing that, some cities were all wanting to claim that they were entitled to this exemption. I said, wait, their property's still there. They don't get this. And you started kind of looking and listening and realizing some of the common denominators were that, maybe they were being pushed to do this and all kind of networking and playing telephone, or telephone tree and talking to each other and trying to go to the old 8% because a lot of them didn't like it in the first place. They didn't like the idea of letting the voters have this right. And so, we're still kind of investigating and looking at it. But one of the things that I found, and it came up in that conversation, I think Chairman Bettencourt referenced, was there's a magazine that's published by the counties. And I don't know if it's directly with your tax dollars or indirectly, but it actually had pre-printed forms, I guess, trying to encourage counties to adopt these resolutions to utilize the 8% instead of 3.5%. And of course, as the bill sponsor, I was very offended, and we spent a lot of time making sure that everybody listening to this, you have a statutory right to vote on increases of city and county budgets taxing over 3.5%. That is your right. We fought for it and you have it. And to watch people use your tax dollars or try to take that away from you, yeah, we're going to call them out. We're going to talk about it. We're going to propose maybe some legislation to remedy it. But everybody needs to pay attention that if your city or a county is being pushed to do this, you need to ask questions. You need to be engaged. This is not about, a state versus local. This is about a right that you have, that we fought for to make sure that you have, that people are trying to take away from you. And we want you to be engaged and understand what's going on in this battle. And you'll see a lot of attention being paid to this because there's a lot of money at stake. It's your money.
Yeah, boy, that's really well said. I want to key in on one of the excellent points you made, Chairman Burrows, and that is the incorrect framing that some people, particularly the Texas Municipal League, use, which is state versus local. In fact, this is pro-taxpayer or anti-taxpayer. There is no other way of understanding this. It really is that simple: pro-taxpayer or anti-taxpayer, and people can decide which side they're on. Obviously, for the two of you and the vast majority of your constituents, and for us at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, we're in the first camp. Vance, I want to ask you one question, and then we're starting to see several excellent audience questions come in, which is not a surprise because we have the best audience in the world. So, Vance, this is a question for people. I've heard this over the last few days in anticipation of this. Tell us, in simple terms, you're a brainiac economist, so in simple terms, for this Longhorn, what are the taxing jurisdictions that we need to be paying most attention to? Is it the cities? Is it the counties? Is it the school districts? In other words, people have asked me leading up to today's live stream, is there a particular category of these taxing jurisdictions that are the biggest offenders?
Yeah, no, it's something that's a great question, Kevin. I think it's one that we all want to look for in our wherever we're living, and trying to find out, okay, where should I go first? We have only limited time every day,
Exactly.
and it seems to be the case. One of the chairmen can correct me if they know something different, but it seems to be cities are those that are wanting to raise up to the 8% rate. We've recently done some public information requests from the 10 most populated counties, from those local taxing entities, and received information in from about 27 of them so far, and about 25 of them were cities who were looking at raising their rate up to the 8% rate. Not that they will do it, but they were at least looking at what that tax rate would be to get up to that level. So that kind of indicates to you where they're at. I know Chairman Bettencourt earlier said 38 counties, 38 jurisdictions had initially considered the 8% rate. So there are a lot that are out there. I think cities look to be the worst among them, if you will. But so we really need to keep pressure on them, checking to see what their budgets are going to look like, and really talking to them, calling the offices and going to some of those meetings to put more pressure on them not to raise above the 3.5%. And in fact, during this period of time, they should be looking at, cutting their overall property taxes when many Texans are suffering and are without a job right now.
Yeah, well said. Well, first audience question is a perfect segue from that response, Vance, and I'll pitch this to the three of you. This audience member lives in Pflugerville, which is a great city just north of Austin. And they're saying that in Pflugerville, the city council is using the 8% as the voter approved tax rate. This audience member says, I've been speaking out at city council meetings. If they go ahead with this, what else can be done?
Well, I think I'll just make a comment. You're right. City of Pflugerville's on this list. Mm-hmm. And right next to the city of Sugar Land, who both fought us. City of Sugar Land, Mayor Zimmerman was an outright opponent of SB2 constantly. Now, what we'll start doing is, I guess, Chairman Burrows, it's time to start tag team in the city of Pflugerville on a vote. And I call it rate shaming, okay, because that's what it needs to be. And look, there's no factor supposition of fact that they need to go to basically tax their people at $100+ more a year. They've got a ton of free federal money. Vince can talk about that. They've got COVID payments already coming through, the state and the feds from the feds. And so it's time to really get cranking on them. One person can file a challenge legally under the tax code. And actually, to Harris County's defense, the county attorney mentioned that to his commissioners that all it takes is one person to file a legal challenge and they got trouble. So it sounds like, Chairman Burrows, we've got a new rate shaming target at the city of Pflugerville.
Good. It looks like we're going to have a fun evening on Twitter with Pflugerville. But, I've heard this, and I think that, all of us in the tax world hear this. It's not really wealthy people. I think that's where people get confused. It's people who are struggling with, day-to-day living, and they get the property tax bill due and they're frustrated by it and they think, what can I do? I had a really long conversation. I've been helping a single mother, who's really frustrated by this process and the runaround that they're getting, in my own local city and some other things. And here's the advice I have to everybody. It's show up, use the tools that we've created that helps amplify your voice, but organize. There are so many other people out there that feel like you do, that they don't want to hear the excuses anymore about why their property taxes are going up, or even the misdirection saying that property taxes aren't going up when in fact they are. But organize, start Facebook pages, start online groups, Nextdoor, whatever the new technology is. I'm not the most technological savvy person, but there's a lot of benefits that are from there, and you can find other people who are there, and make sure that the people who are doing this and using COVID-19, as an excuse to basically raise taxes when you can least afford it, that you call them out, that you do shame them, that you organize, you get other, people, make sure that, you find somebody to run against them next time they're up on the ballot, because that's not how you want to be represented, because you're not being represented in taxing matters the way you want to. And I think those are really some of the most critical, important ways that you can have your voice heard, but make sure that it's heard. And, we're happy to help amplify it as well.
Well, Go ahead.
If I could add real fast, look, it's the power of the vote is very important. The basic principle in SB2, Kevin, was to give the vote to the people. Okay, and that's important that they have that chance to vote on excess tax increases, and really what Pflugerville is doing is trying to bypass that. Now, look, municipal elections got delayed from May. Maybe the Pflugerville elections are in November. It would be a really stupid thing for them to do, foolish, to be pushing a huge tax increase, and because then the voters will vote on them.
Yeah, that's really important to remember. And I'll just underscore what both of you are saying, which is, and this is meant to encourage this audience member who sounds understandably discouraged, and that is, it does not take a whole lot of light being shown onto some darkness. And let's face it, it is a lack of transparency that sort of shrouds these tax increase debates at the city council and county commissioner courts.
And Kevin, by the way, remember Round Rock was going to delay their election. That got out, and then immediately there was a clarification that came out. They said they couldn't delay it for a year, so they have to have it in November. So we're going to start. We'll shine the light next on Pflugerville.
Good. Well, thanks a lot for that response. I know that audience member must appreciate it. So another audience member asked about a similar issue, and this drives me crazy just as a property taxpayer. I don't know where they live, but this is what they say. My property taxes have gone up 59% in 5 years, and yet not a single person from the appraisal office has ever showed up to look at my property in person. How does that not fit the description of fraud?
Do you want me to?
Look,
this is something that we hear quite a bit. It's a frustration. You know, appraisal districts do mass appraisals. They don't go out and do the individualized ones. The question that I have always, you know, when it comes to appraisals and appraisal reforms is it accurate? You know, if it is not an accurate appraised value of your property, you need to protest it. If you don't get relief and there's a systemic flaw, you know, come let us know about it, because maybe there is something wrong with the system. If it is an accurate appraisal, but it just keeps going up, well, it's an accurate appraisal as it's meant to be. And I think, you know, you need to continue to focus on the rate, because those are the people you elect to raise or lower your property taxes. At least that's the way I kind of view, you know, this situation.
Yeah, it really good.
Kevin, if we could, I got another chart if you can see it.
This is just the best Aggie low-tech technology, Senator.
Yeah, right. This is how to be poking over this. This is actually what taxed Harris County into full-blown tax revolt. This is 2003 all the way up to 2017, and we had a 51% increase in that 4-year period on our total net tax bill. And
is that 2003 or 2013?
Well, that's actually 13 to 17. That's when we actually got the bill out of the Senate and out of the special session, because Chairman Burrows will remember that. So that type of pressure is what actually got the bill out of the Senate. And then the continuing pressure is what allowed Chairman Burrows to get a version of it out of the House, because unfortunately it takes people getting taxed at this rate to get their attention of their elected officials. And but the good news is that wherever this has occurred, votes get changed pretty rapidly.
That's some of the light that gets shown in the darkness.
One thing I would comment on is, Chairman, if y'all both remember from your distinguished property tax committees, there were very few who were testifying in favor of SB2. And the people that were testifying against it were the elected officials from the cities and counties and others. I remember in one of the Ways and Means Committee hearings, Chairman Burrows, there was a line, you know, out the door, packed place. And they were saying, look, we're going to have to defund the police, and we're going to have to do this, that, and another. But now they're doing that to themselves, calling for defunding the police. And I just wonder what else y'all have been hearing recently from some of those folks.
Well, I'll say the comment on that. Yeah, we hear, basically that the first that always goes is all the public safety type of stuff, because that's the threat. It's a fear factor. Now, we're not in the city of Portland or Seattle where they just voted to defund their entire police department. I don't think that's happened in Texas yet, thank God. But the pressure, and I'll give you another Aggie, deal here. This shows where the highest increases were in appraised values in the state. Harris County actually had the highest increase. See if I can swing it over here. At 8%, Montgomery County 7.25%, Bear 6.7%, Dallas 6.6%, Fort Bend 4.8%, Tarrant County 3.8%, El Paso 2%, Collin 2.3%, and there are appraisal reforms built into SB2, but they're more subtle. Like you have to have standardized practices. There's a complaint committee that the comptrollers put together to look at the ratio studies. The good news is we passed about 36 other bills, including things like your value can't be raised at an ARB hearing anymore. So we would that was one of the things that would drive people crazy in the hearings, where they would walk in and they would threaten to raise their value so you'd be happy with the value you had. Now, I want to say one thing about these hearings. I knew we were going to win in February of 2019 when we had no regular citizen, no ordinary person walked in to oppose SB2. It was all paid lobby, or like in the city of Mansfield's case, they sent 12 people to testify against, everybody from the city manager, the fire chief, and the police chief, and they all said it was going to be a catastrophe, and they were going to completely not be able to police their cities. But Texas cities are compared to what I'm seeing on the nightly news, a lot better policed than they are in Portland or Seattle for sure.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I'll make, a comment, and this is, I think, pretty much on topic, but I'll remember from those hearings, people came up, and the ordinary citizens, they'd driven on their own dimes, stayed in hotels, eaten, and they came and they, talked about the hardships they faced and being run out of their home or small business, and it was very compelling. But let me tell you the other thing that really struck a nerve with me and really kind of hit home. I visited with a lot of them after the hearings about what they saw and kind of it. And what they really were offended by is they saw their tax dollars being used to have high-priced lobbyists come, and testify against their interests. And they would say to me, wait a second, you mean I've got to take off work, which is real money to my family. I've got to spend my own money on gasoline. I've got to come down to Austin because I've come from, far, far away to actually do this. And yet I find there's rooms full of people being paid with my own tax dollars against me. And it's just not fair. And they were really, really frustrated by that. And you can feel and you can understand why. And they spoke out. And so I think that's something that was a really, tangible emotion. And I hope people can understand or take the time to talk to some of the people in the room who show up to try to make their government work for them, only to find their tax dollars are being used against them. But I think the original question, I'll touch on it briefly, is what am I hearing from some of those groups who opposed SB2 now? I think they realize that, they're kind of at the end, that no matter what happens with the pandemic, that the clock is run out and there's going to be more local control, in the sense voters have more control and the taxpayers have more rights under this bill. And so they're worried about us even tightening up some more. Some of the ideas that I've had, and I think are really good ideas, is I would love to see, maybe municipal elections move to November full time. We're going to see what it's like this time, but let's go through the budget setting hearing and the rate setting hearing, and then have a referendum election after that rather than before. I think it might be fresher on people's minds. And I think that's a good taxpayer reform, but I've heard a lot of people say they don't like that. One of the things that I worried about, and I think Chairman Bettencourt and I share this, is I worry about people trying to end run the spirit of SB2 and go to certificates of obligation and use debt financing rather than basically, to do paying as you go. And if we start to see those and we start measuring those, we may need to go and take non-voter approved debt and categorize it as something that actually falls under the rollback rate or the voter approval rate. Kind of a technical thing, but something I'm definitely paying attention to and watching for, that I know those who oppose SB2 also know I'm watching for and are being vocal about being in opposition to.
And it'll come as no surprise to you or any of our audience here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're cataloging all of those certificates of obligation. We're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's crucial that we shed the light on that as well. So in the waning minutes we have here, Mr. Chairman and Dr. Ginn, I have a couple questions looking ahead to the next session. also from some smart audience members. One of them asks, our city lobbyists recently bragged that they got the disaster declaration into the bill. And this is relevant to the COVID crisis, obviously. Are we going to update it next session to include only natural disasters to be more clear?
You know, look, people can brag all they want, but I actually know the truth. Okay. And the truth was that, you know, it took press releases like this that said plastered in El Paso, toasted in Travis, cool in Collin, and major hike in Harris to get people's attention to pass that bill. And as Chairman Burrows already said, the emergency management was actually done in 17 in the House. It was designed around what happened with Ike and Harvey on physical damage. Now, look, I'll tell you this. If people cross the line here, you can count on a bill that gets filed by both Bs, okay, that will bust some butts if that's what it takes, because it's up to them to act responsibly now. The smart ones are the city of Dallas and Longview and others that are rejecting that siren call from TAC or TML to go up on their taxes. And so we're going to have a bill. We've also got a carry forward averaging that I know Chairman Burrows put into the bill in the House that can be used to penalize bad behavior. And the fact of the matter is, I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. If you go to the public and say, I've got all this federal money, I've got all this state money, and I'm socking it to the taxpayers because an 8% rollback rate in the old days means double digit. That's an Aggie counting all his fingers, okay? That means a 10% plus increase on the average home and a much higher one on commercial property, which we haven't talked about. And they think that the voters are going to reward them. They're going to be shocked because people are mad in this. Every poll I see, people are just ready to tee off. And if they want to do what an old movie line used to be, make my day, then go ahead and do it, because it's going to make, the voters' day. They're going to find them and they're going to punch them out.
Nothing to add to that from me. So let's move on to the second question from audience here about the next session. And that is about the future of the property tax. This person is asking, can we foresee a time when we can eliminate the property tax entirely?
Yeah, I'll look. This is a interim charge that the Speaker asked House Ways and Means to look at. We are taking a look at that. We're not going to go to an income tax. That's clear that I don't like it. I don't want it. It's a horribly bad idea, and the voters just recently rejected it. So we're not going to transition there. The ideal is to try to basically move more towards a consumption-based tax, as a replacement, not actually net value added, but as a swap. And the only reason being is people have more control over how much they spend. There's carves outs for necessities, and we're currently taking a look at it. I can't tell you that next session that's a achievable thing or not, given that, we're dealing with a lot of budget issues and other things. But, I think it's important to have that conversation and to try to wean ourselves off of funding government with property tax to the extent that we can.
But let me just add this. No matter what revenue stream we're looking at, you've got to control spending.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I got involved in lowering that rollback rate, and it's because it hadn't been done in 38 years, but that fundamentally, regardless of the value, regardless of the rate, that pushes pressure on tax levies to keep spending under control. Now, I don't care what form of taxation you got, you have to have the ability to put pressure on spending. And that's the key thing. So in a property tax world, we now got positive pressure on the school side and on the major county sides right now. I don't want to give that up. And no matter what we need is, and I know this is music to Chairman Burrows and the TPPF fans everywhere, because we've been talking about this, but, overall spending controls, like at Tabor in Colorado and other things, have been on the target for conservatives for a long time, because I don't care where you get your tax money, from property taxes, from sales taxes, from fees, fines, or the dreaded income tax. Okay. All of that has to be controlled. And I just thank God that Dustin and I serve in a legislature.
I think we lost your audio, Senator Bettencourt.
I think it's worthwhile to emphasize what Chairman Bettencourt said because it's so important. Spending.
That's right.
I mean, we all know that, basically, I don't care what level of government is, you decide how much they're going to spend and then set a corresponding adopted tax rate.
Yep.
And, the idea behind SB2 is to give, voters more control over how much property taxes are. But also, it's democracy. The elected officials in charge of those taxing decisions, if they think they need to have more taxes, they get to go out and make their case. This is not a hard cap. And so if they think that there's spending priorities that, people are comfortable with and worthwhile with, they get the opportunity to go sell that. They get the opportunity to go out there and make their case for it. And the voters get the ultimate check and balance on that. And so there's really nothing wrong. That's really participatory, good form of government, but it all starts with how much money people want to spend of your money and then tax your property to raise it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks,
that's right.
Mr. Chairman. Vance, I was just going to go to you last before going back through the three of you for some closing comments, and not to preclude whatever you were about to say, and sorry for the interruption, but TPPF for a long time has been an advocate for moving to a consumption tax. We understand that ideal operates within the art of the possible in politics and policy. And so we have to take some steps to get there. So we understand that, but just wanted to give you the opportunity as the economist among the four of us to weigh in on that and whatever else is on your mind about the next session.
No, I think the two chairmen and yourself, Kevin, hit it on the head. Is we've got to do something about spending. Spending is what drives taxes and everything else. And I think we should move to some people say we need a three-legged stool of taxes where you have an income tax, a property tax, and a sales tax. And that's going to keep a sturdy stool. I like to think about a single-legged bar stool that's broad, right? Has a broad base. That's a more fair sort of tax system that's going to provide the least amount of burden overall to fund government expenditures. And that's done through a consumption tax, a final sales tax. And look, we've looked at this for a while here at the foundation. I think what we've been proposing are really kind of two options, but the key is always to limit government spending. And one thing we've looked at is to look at the school maintenance and operations property tax, which is about half the property tax burden in Texas, and to say, look, if the state was to limit their spending to population inflation, or maybe just make it flat 4% and use any additional revenue to buy down the school maintenance and operation property tax, you could eliminate half the property tax burden in about a decade. Or another way to go about it is to broaden the sales tax base and raise the sales tax rate a little bit, where you have the state and local portion that's currently at 8.25%, raise it up to about 10% with that broader base, and then you could eliminate half the property tax overnight. And I think what that would do on either one of these scenarios is allows for more economic growth, because the size and scope of government, being government spending, isn't growing faster than the means of taxpayers. And I think this is something that we've really got to do, is hopefully as soon as possible. Maybe it's not this session, maybe it's not the next, but I think we've got to continue taking steps in that direction, because it will make Texas even more of an economic juggernaut to let people prosper overall. And just, final comments is that, look, we're in an economic recession. We're coming out of it, and some things are heading in the right direction. We need to get to a place where we can reopen safely, responsibly, things along those lines for the health of Texans all across this great state. And one of the things that we can't do is burden them more from coming up when they've already been put down so much. And I think what we can see there is more economic growth, more job opportunities, and more income if we can keep property taxes from growing excessively. Look, also hit the no new tax revenue rate. Why not do 0% growth? Why not even cut taxes? One of my colleagues, James Quintero, he talks a lot about what if we could cut property taxes and allow for voters to vote on it in some capacity. I think it's a great idea. We need to look at reducing the burden overall. And so I love what the great two chairmen here are doing. And I hope they will continue that up next session, as I know they will, because there's a lot of good that we need to continue to do here in the great state of Texas.
Well, thanks, Vance. And you've queued up final comments from our two legislator friends. Chairman Burrows, we'll start with you. in particular, in your concluding comments, I know our audience members would appreciate your underscoring anything that they can be doing to assist you and Chairman Bettencourt in keeping the pressure on local jurisdictions who are trying to raise taxes.
Yeah. So look, there's really, I'll make my message very simple. So I hopefully put the emphasis on there. Find your new county portal. Lubbock County taxes.org is where it is in Lubbock. Everyone's got one over 200,000. Go to it. Go look through all the different taxing entities. Figure out how much more in dollars and cents each of them are proposing to levy on your property, and then give them feedback. I think it's really, really important that you actually click those forms, you send an email, you let the people you've elected to represent you in these taxing matters know how you feel about it. Communicate with them, because I think we can get that information back and realize that there was a groundswell of support. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is sometimes challenging, but try to find other like-minded people, organize. It's a grassroots effort. Figure out who else really cares about this. Start asking questions, start making noise, start going to the rate setting hearings if you don't have to go to work or take time off to go there, and make sure that you are a voice and advocate for the taxpayer. If you will do those two things, it may not happen overnight, but there's so many people who feel the same way that you do, that eventually you will have a grassroots effort that is successful, that is pro-taxpayer, and it's just mostly needed in almost every jurisdiction across the state of Texas.
Thank you. Senator Bettencourt.
Two more charts, and then we're going to end it. This is why we had to act on schools. This is what happened with school taxes. It went up 50% since 2011 years. And that's why the legislature did pass House Bill 3. So as values go up, you've got a 2.5% cap, and the state makes up the difference. We're finally coming out of the Robin Hood hole that we used to balance the state budget on, and we're contributing in education. So the state has actually put its money where its mouth is on property taxes on the school side. And this is why we had to act on the non-school side. This shows you the rate of increases over here in just over the same period of time. And special taxing units went up over 100% in 11 years. Cities and counties, 80%. Schools, which we saw here was bad, but that was only 50% increase compared to what city and counties and special districts have done. So we've taken these first big steps, but as Chairman Burrows said, it's a continuing fight. So, ask for our help. If you got a city, you can see all this data on my Senate site at senatetexas.gov. As a member, you can go to the specific area. If we're in if we're in another fight, it's at paulbettencourt.com. It doesn't matter. The data is the same either way place, because the data was obvious. People were being taxed out of their homes and businesses. The state had to do something about it. And fortunately, we had a House Speaker that joined the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor, all three of them, in helping us get that bill passed, and the Senate, not just in the Senate, but in the House too, as well as getting the school finance bill put through, had about $5 billion worth of property tax cuts too. So all that's in the system, and we're going to continue to fight. So if you need our help, you can get a hold of at Burrows and at Team Bettencourt on Twitter, and we'll come help. I mean, call the cavalry in, because we've got nothing better to do than to have a discussion with taxpayers about what's happening in their town. And if people are foolish enough to try to go back to the past and use the pre-SB2 numbers, as opposed to using what is, as Vincent said, is the right number, which is the no new revenue tax rate, much less the new voter approval limit of 3.5%. We're with you till the end of the line. That's what I want to tell taxpayers wherever you are. We're going to continue to work at this, and we're going to continue to pass whatever we can to continue tax relief and also continue transparency, because a lot of elected officials are going to get emails for the first time about tax rates. It's going to be mind altering for them, but I think it's high time that they talk to the real constituents, which are you, the taxpayers.
That is so well said, gentlemen. And it sounds like the next stop on your shared rate shaming tour is Pflugerville, Texas. Texas Policy Foundation will be right there with you, because Pflugerville is a great place, and taxpayers there are great people. I'm sure the elected officials are. It's nothing personal. It's a matter of being pro-taxpayer. I can't thank you enough as a fellow Texan, as the head of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, for what you do. Your sacrifices as legislators, along with those of your colleagues of both parties, are things that we ought to be grateful for, even though sometimes we all have political differences. So our thoughts and prayers are with you. May God bless you and your families. And of course, for those of you who've joined us in our audience, thank you for your time, for what you're going to do to help keep Texas, Texas. May God bless you, and may he continue to bless the great state of Texas.